the topic I was working with is the white-collar explosion, and particularly the 9-to-5 working housewife and mother. And you can approach it from two areas, in that the woman white-collar worker is part of a larger, just general female labor force, and then also part of the entire white-collar working force. And so many of the characteristics that these white-collar women have, they share with fellow women in the blue-collar labor force, or they share with fellow white-collar workers in general. But they do have a few specific needs and problems and maybe viewpoints that hopefully we'll bring out and we can talk about too. And just first, I want to talk about an overview. What is white-collar? I really wasn't quite sure of a specific definition or just what it all entails, and I'm still not real definite. We can talk about that, but it's you look it up in a dictionary, it'll talk about salaried or professional workers who aren't usually involved with manual labor. Well, what's manual labor? When I think about that, people working in an assembly line, actually, using some, physical labor. People in factories or people, craftsmen, plumbers, who are going out and doing their crafts. White-collar people are more localized in their office. That's what you think of white-collar worker. The clerks or the bankers or the salesmen, even if they are going about selling whatever product, they have a home base, a home office. So white-collar workers seem to encompass the office workers. Just to give you a general idea of who's involved in what kind of occupation. So I just made a list of the general categories. I can just pass it around.
Well, I think
Oh, no. That's okay.
I use some manual labor.
I'll come back to that. And then we want to talk a little bit about women in the labor force. And, of course, the women white-collar workers are a subgroup of that. During the past quarter of the century, the total labor force has grown by 31 million, and this increase is contributed mainly, a good portion by women. They've constituted about 3/5 of that 31 million increase. So there's a equal, or even, not only half the contributions by men, more of it is by women. Right now, in 1982, there have seen variant figures, but from 50 to 56% of women in America from age 16 to 64 are working either by choice or by necessity. And that's an increase from 41% in 1970. And I got two more visual aids for you. This one change, this is what I did Saturday instead of watching games, is showing how this increase in of women in the workforce has divided up by three different subgroups according to marital status. The blue is married, the yellow is for single women, and then the green is for widows, divorced, or separated women. As you can see, going back to 1940, single women made up the greatest proportion of women in the labor force, but it was fairly distributed. I mean, it was a small amount, about 15 million. But as each group is, increasing throughout the years, it's the married group that's increasing by the most. So this is a sort of old figure, by 1974, there are 20 million women in the labor force were married, whereas just 10 were single. So it's showing there's a change in the composition of the women working in the labor force. And this brings up some problems and different things like this. Just a whole sort of social change in that you're having married, and this also includes mothers. You know, you're having married women and mothers not staying at home as you had, you know, earlier on, but more and more going out to work. Either this doesn't account for whether they're full-time or part-time or temporary. That's another question. And speaking of mothers in the workforce, this is perhaps the figure that's changed the most significantly. The bottom line is the mothers with preschool-age children, and the blue top line is mothers with school-age children. And I guess they're confusing. So, but what this is showing is the number of mothers, you know, who fit into this category. And for example, in 1948, about 14 or 13 million mothers who had children under 6 were going into the labor force. And it's steadily increasing until about 1974, where you've got about 37 million in the labor force. And after I did this, I found the latest figure, and now it's up to 46% of women with preschool-age children are in the labor force. And for women with school-age children, it's now up to 63%. So over half of, you know, more than half of mothers of school-age children are in the labor force, and even if you combine it, you know, it come out around half of mothers in working at some point or another. So this will involve, which I'll talk about later, the need for child care support and all the need for maybe more flexible hours for these working women, so they can combine their dual roles of, you know, mother, housemaker, and a career woman. So, and briefly, I want to. There seem to be 3 patterns of course, this will apply to any kind of worker, but it one pattern especially so for women. There's where you get out of school or as far as you go and you work, and then for women they stop and either to marry or to have children and then don't enter the workforce anymore. There's another pattern of women working throughout their lives continuously full time. And then the third predominant pattern now is that women are working and then at some point along their career stop having children and then re-entering the labor force later on. And at that point when they're re-entering, either they have stayed out long enough so they're no longer need to support their children or take care of them. Many of the times, though, they still have their children living at home, and they're trying to arrange, have their work schedules accommodate the situation. And this is where the increase in part-time jobs is coming into hand, and that a number of occupations are increasing the number of part-time jobs. But as it happens, those jobs that are available to part-time flexibility are those in which women are already overrepresented. And I can go back to this now. You can see what I've done is put in green all those occupations in which the percentage of female workers is greater than 50. As you can see, there's an over-concentration here under the clerical workers, predominantly female. And it's in here, the clerical workers and also the health technicians or teachers that are accepting more and more part-time jobs. And so women are able to find part-time jobs so they can spend time with their children, their home, and also work. And yet, they're still limited in where they can work in these part-time jobs. They're working with women have worked and continue to work in the clerical areas in particular. And in fact, there's one figure that quoted that 1/3 of working mothers are working part-time. So that seems to be a significant way of scheduling their work. And one other just general thing I wanted to bring out is, we talked about who's working and when they're working, or why are women working more now. And the most obvious and practical need is just, financial need. Most families, I would think, are finding that they need a second income to supplement the first one. And two, the number of households that are headed by a woman who's the first and only earner, who's bringing home the money, that figure is rising. And thirdly, with a high increase of divorce and separation rates, women are just finding that either if they're married, they want to have their own independent means for support just in case, or if they now find themselves divorced or separated and alone, they need that extra income. So, here's some thoughts of why they're working. And then now, when we go to on the job, of course, these factors I'm going to list are concerns of all workers, but I'll try to apply them, to women, white-collar workers in particular. And one is opportunity. Do white-collar workers, especially women, have, chance for upward mobility, or just a wide choice when they're entering the job market, or how's that situation? Well, we go back to this, what I call de facto occupational segregation, where they now, with we have equal employment opportunity with the commission, the EEOC, which enforces enforces fair practice regulations, and will bring suit against those that are unfair hiring or promoting action. And we've got the Fair Labor Act and Fair Pay Act and lots of different federal regulations that supposedly should be opening more occupations to women. And then just the general viewpoints of people. I think people are in general becoming more liberal in that they're not seeing that women are only to stay in the home and period, not going to work. So we've got laws to help enforce freedom of choice of employment and just sort of hold public opinion, but still women seem to be concentrated in certain areas, and although traditionally male-dominated occupations such as the top 4 and the 5 in the profession, dentists, pharmacists, physicians, and managers, are having a slow infiltration by women. It seems that more of the administrators type occupations, especially bank officials and health administrators, have the greatest increase. Here in sales, you see that the women are predominantly with one area, the retail trade sales clerk, and that's consistently the same. And you're wondering, well, how has this come about? Why are women in, quote, female labeled occupations and men stay in the male labeled occupations? Well, a lot has to do with past discrimination, and perhaps, there are a whole lot of reasons, and welcome all your viewpoints. One, when women are being hired or being promoted, it's not. I've talked to some women out there, and it's of course not legal for them to be asked questions of, well, are you planning to have children, or what do you feel about raising a family, or those kind of questions. The leading assumption is that eventually this woman who wants to be employed, if I'm the employer wants to be employed by me now, will want to leave for some amount of time, if for permanently, to have children. And if the employer is faced with a female applicant and then a male applicant, even if nothing is, even if the applicants don't say anything about leaving for raising a family, many times in the back of the mind, if the interviewer might just be prejudiced, thinking that, if the woman's of a certain age, she'll eventually want to leave. And this could limit the vertical mobility of women to be promoted to higher levels in their occupation, or even prevent them from entering a certain occupational level. So that's a thought. Let's see. And just another thing I thought was very interesting, you can probably surmise from this listing, is that, a 1975 figure said beyond that, they're not guaranteed upon return to have receive the same amount of pay and the same rank of job. Notice I say same rank of job, in that if a woman leaves to have her child and stay home for the first few weeks, when she comes back, she may not necessarily have the same job that she had when she left, but she should have the right to receive the same level or rank of job. Now, I don't know how, I guess it depends on each individual business or how it works, but I don't know how that would influence possible promotions in the future. Just having a different job, although it might be the, quote, the same rank. Or just a few examples, I saw that the companies trying to make it easier on these mothers who are white-collar workers. For example, the Continental Illinois National Bank and Trust Company of Chicago, they put up computer terminals in the homes of the women so they can stay at home, proceed with as much their business as they can, and yet still look after their children in their home environment. And other possibilities are meeting with clients at home, or doing more work via telephoning at home. And then let's see. Well, as I say, we can talk about any of these things. Another major concern, of course, and perhaps, there's nothing to say, but perhaps affecting in a subtler way female white-collar workers more than women in other areas, is the question of sexual harassment. And just to throw out sort of an astounding statistic, the Center for Women Policy Studies of Washington, as a Washington-based research group, has estimated that 18 million American women were harassed sexually while at work during 1979 and 1980. Now that doesn't separate into white collar or blue collar, whatever. So that's an overwhelming number of women. And of course, it's not limited to women, but the majority of complaints or harassment, of course, are directed towards women. So I'll direct my discussion towards that. And this can range from just leering or innuendos to attempted rape. And there's one study that the U.S. Merit Systems Protection Board had a two-year study. They sent out confidential questionnaires to 23,000 women, and their response was that 1 out of 100 women who responded had faced an attempted rape or actual assault. So I myself, didn't realize the extent of that. Of course, if these are, true findings. And I just, I've talked about, some concerns that that most workers face, and then that, white-collar women workers face in particular. And I thought I'd just talk a little bit more generally about two areas, clerical and sales. And as you can see, those are two areas dominated by women. The clerical segment of the labor force now is the largest single female job category in the USA, and it's the number of women working, number of workers in the clerical segment of the labor force has tripled since World War II. Perhaps that's a reflection of just maybe the way our whole economies is turning from manufacturing to maybe distributing and financing and services. And of course, I have no experience from the way it used to be, or, for example, let's say World War II or in the 30s or 40s. But just, you can add to this too. There's a general trend, though, of changing the atmosphere and the way, the environment in which these clerical workers are working in. I think there's a trend for less give and take among workers. It's more of perhaps a more tension-producing environment. Of course, there's more automation, more mechanization, increased use of computer terminals and telecommunications and whatever, which will not only perhaps, or in a way, will ease the workload, but at the same time will require fewer people to do that workload with these increased technology. Just like last week we saw the increasing technology at the mill. Of course, people were pointing out, well, that just meant fewer people were having to work there. Well, the same is going to be happening to the white-collar working force too, and especially the clerical, which goes back to they'll be affecting women more so. With sales, one change might be seen in the increased use of part-time jobs. Personally, I worked at Ivy's this past, 2 summers ago, and the majority of people working there were part-time workers, and from reading, that's a good reflection of the way it's going. And some, ramifications of that means that there will be, with these different shifts, more women might be working. Since I say more women, meaning just inferring that more women are involved in sales than men. We're working like in the 5 to 9 p.m. shifts, or to 10 or 11 o'clock at night. There's no longer it's not any longer a 9 to 5 job, but it's for these part-time jobs. In a way you have more flexibility, but then again, a lot of times you don't have a choice. If you're a part-time worker and they say, well, we're going to give you the 3 in the afternoon shift to 11 o'clock, you have to take it. And go ahead. Right. I think it's, I don't know which came first. I didn't come across that, but I think, if the workers did, they push for more of it, the company's, going to be very compliant, because as you say, one example, they had a story from one company and the sales worker in it. In that specific store, a part-time worker had to work there for 6 months before they could have health benefits. And like you say, they won't have to pay overtime because they'll have more workers, working all the hours, and yet none of the workers will, amass, overtime hours. And so, in a way, if the hours suit the workers, it could benefit both sides. Let's see. And I think another thing just a few other things with sales, just in general, it's a kind of, day in, day out job with stresses. For example, in this kind of job, you've got to be polite and courteous to the customers every day, and sometimes during rush hour they can get pretty rude. And again, from personal experience, you can have a lot of suppressed hostility. And that's where it leads all this, I have heart disease in a few years. But in that kind of restricted environment, you can't let it out when you're under a lot of authority and you don't have much, the sales worker or clerk doesn't have much flexibility in what they can do, where they can do it. Perhaps they feel very constrained, and that can increase tension. And just the physical part of being on your feet for the whole day, which is not unique to the sales workers. Many workers have experienced that, so that still can be very tiring. As for from the clerical standpoint, for the low-paying jobs, they too have a lack of of autonomy and control of their working environment. And Mr. Ross is describing how in the large insurance companies, they're just gigantic rooms full of clerks or typists under the direct supervision of a supervisor who's actually elevated up and can there's no partitions, everyone's exposed, and it's very you lose a lot of your own personal flexibility and independence that way. And it's almost, and you can foresee perhaps some of these white-collar workers almost going back into an assembly line manner in which they're assigned specific tasks and they don't have any chance for on-the-job training which could help them for promotion. They're limited to the specific tasks, almost typecast to, this person can only key punch, or do something in such a way and can't do anything else. And that way the worker's also losing some flexibility. And so if I had to state some general trends for the future of white-collar workers, that would be one of them, and that there'd be increasing increasing technology, but leading also to maybe increased road or assembly line setup of white-collar workers. I've covered things sort of fast in a random manner, but have any questions that I've brought up or talked about tonight?
I'd like to make a comment about increases in white-collar, and we've had a period of 10 years of inflation, but at the same time, family income, especially family income, aggressive inflation, didn't go down for a long time because a lot of the mechanism by which something is set in the marketplace is the family income drops. You have a woman at home or a kid who is a simple earner. She goes out in the marketplace and family income rises and the disposable income exceeds inflation. But after so many years, all the mommies put their kids in daycare and going after work tools, and that's when inflation starts to get hard. And the other side of that coin is that the people that are really struggling already have their family schools and kids in daycare, and they have no leeway. Whereas if the banker is pulling in $40,000 a year or something, and gets his wife a job as a secretary, $50,000 a year.
If you, as you say, the increase, in the number of women going, and also with the overconcentration, overcrowding of white-collar women in these clerical or sales jobs means an oversupply or reverse pool, and perhaps it's not explained the approximation of why they still have low wages there and continue to have low wages. So we talked about vertical mobility, and in a way, women are limited, and many authors say they have virtually no financial ladder, no way to climb up. Another concern for a particular segment of the female white-collar workers are the concerns of black female white-collar workers. As you might have read in the article, the New York Times article listed some statistics that showed the gain of women white-collar workers, and the white women had a 18% gain in entry into the white-collar working force, from 13% in 1966 to 31% in 1979, whereas black female white-collar workers had only a gain of 1.6% to, they were still only,
I believe the word was professional. We used white collar.
Okay.
The difference was the entrance into
professional labor
Yeah,
force.
right.
You're right. Which still showed
A higher level. The point you're making is
right.
a higher level is what your point is.
That you had concurrently there was a drop in the percentage of male professionals, of course, very showing that the gains weren't proportionate there. And also, why is this happening? Well, past discrimination, you could gather. There are a lot of questions and a lot of answers that need, a lot of questions that need to be answered. Another real concern of white-collar workers, in addition to opportunity and mobility, of course, is earnings. And a question that comes up for women here is the concept of comparable pay or comparable worth or pay equity. It comes with a lot of terms. But what it essentially means is should women, the concept that women should get, or it could be men, interchange it, but women should get equal pay for jobs that are comparable, not necessarily identical, but comparable to the jobs of men. In comparable, I mean in skill, required education, working conditions, hours worked, importance, prestige. And they've come up with figures that even if you, or for example in San Jose, they had a 500,000 study of evaluation of all their jobs, and they said that of female jobs, on the average, receive 15% less pay than male jobs, and these were comparable jobs. So even taking into account that they weren't identical jobs, but should be the same level in education and skill needed, there was a discrepancy. And I can throw out some examples. These, all these statistics, you can reach in and grab what you want. But some sort of striking ones are that a government figure shows that the mean wage for a secretary is $230 a week, which is only $11 more than the median wages of janitors. And the point the author was trying to make was that secretaries that occupational group is composed mostly of women, whereas janitors, that specific occupational group is composed mostly of men. And are these jobs are about equal pay? Are they comparable jobs, though? With the same skill required for both? One other is that an administrative secretary, this is one specific person example, decided to fight for a suit when she learned that a kitchen helper was earning $600 a year more than she was, and she found out when the kitchen helper asked her to fill out some forms because the helper was illiterate. And here's another question of discrepancy in pay and the level of the job. And this is what I kept on coming across, that with the clerical workers in which women predominate, their pay, their earnings are either equal or many times lower than blue-collar workers. And of course, many blue-collar workers involves skill, skill and training and experience, and so it's hard to equate it. But there are many instances where, of course, the clerical workers feel they're not getting, paid enough in comparison to what others are getting paid. And you're wondering, maybe perhaps, why, if here you've got the situation with the white-collar woman working in, for example, a clerical occupation, and she's, rightfully, complaining of a low wage and maybe perhaps not the best working conditions. Well, how can she complain, or why doesn't she? Or how about unions? Well, the way unions fall into it, one article said something about it, that historically white-collar women, and particularly the clerical segment, are one of the least unionized of all the labor force components. And a few reasons might be that, well, the white-collar workers are in more sort of closer-knit, smaller unit parts, and they have closer ties, relations with their managers, employees. They see them daily. There's more of a family atmosphere, so perhaps they don't feel as alienated or detached from the management or company. And perhaps it's just the lack of the knowledge or lack of opportunity to gain access to information about union formation. But there have been attempts to gain collective bargaining rights for these white-collar workers, especially the clerical workers, to some limited success, but not too great. One example is that only 32 out of 14,000 commercial banks are unionized. And one result or ramification of this is that when someone's, again, going into, if you're an applicant for a white-collar job, and again I go back to the clerical because this is sort of a good example, and you go in, you're wanting to be hired or promoted, and say you're given, a certain wage, and it's more subjective in that compared to a blue-collar job, in which union membership is high. When you're hired, correct me if I'm wrong, but when you're hired or promoted for a specific job, you look at the contract and see what your union has negotiated for that occupation or that level, and that's what you get paid. But here in the white-collar segment, if they don't have unions to negotiate certain pay scales for certain jobs, the manager has a little bit more leeway of what they give. And that's perhaps, and maybe that's where some of the prejudice or the viewpoints of, well, she's a woman, she's not going to stay with our company too long, why should I pay her so much, or compared to another applicant. They have a little bit more leeway perhaps. And then another key concern of white-collar worker, of women white-collar workers, but of all workers now, especially during sort of depressed economic times, is job insecurity. And many of the articles that were passed out last week involved just how everyone is being laid off. Everyone, including, at least from this aspect today, the white-collar worker, and in a way they're the new unemployed, because before, many of these occupations had sort of been termed, secure jobs. That was one advantage. But now, executives to typists are being laid off, and we can talk about later if you want to about, the pink slip syndrome of how the people who stay on aren't fired, still are going through, anxiety-ridden times. They're afraid they might be the next ones to get fired. They're overloaded with more work since their coworkers are now laid off. Then, of course, the people who are laid off, and many for the first time, if these are white-collar workers, are experiencing the traumas of unemployment. And a few articles, I don't know whether the ones were passed out or others I've read, mention that white-collar workers, if you want to make generalizations, seem to take their unemployment more personally, perhaps because during the laying off of white-collar workers, it's more on an individual basis, like those two managers or those two workers in this department have to go. It's not like all the people have to go, as with perhaps when a whole factory or a whole mill is, they say we have to shut down the mill, everyone goes. It's more the blue collar or, for example, the mill workers, if the whole mill shut down, it's like, well, it's the company's fault or it's not mine, I didn't do anything wrong. But with a white-collar worker, perhaps they have more self-blame or self-accusation. Gee, I might not have been doing wrong. Why did they, pick me to be laid off? Of course, there are many industrial cuts, from GE to Exxon, and not only cuts in labor, but cuts in wages if they're keeping the people in early retirement. We can talk about that if you want to. one specific concern of the female white-collar working segment, as I mentioned before, is child support, in that when these women do go to work, and all these push chart, 63% of women with school-age children are working, and a high percentage of preschool-age children mothers of preschool-age children are working. Well, how's that going to work out? Of course, ideally there'd be more sharing of household activities between family members, husband and children, older children. And for women re-entering the job, ideally there should be maybe counseling on, how to approach that. And of course, children, they tend to get sick, or you want to be there when they're not feeling well. And so what about the working mother who suddenly the child at school isn't feeling well and needs to come home, and needs to see the doctor? Who's going to take the child there? And there are it's not only for whoever is at home during the day with the family. It's not only watching over the children, but if the disposal breaks down, or the basement starts filling up with water, they've got to stay home to receive the repairman and to stay with that. There's just a lot of factors that there's of running the house during the day that can't be done if both members of the household, the mother and father, are at work. So, with all these problems, how can they be approached? Well, of course, you can have child care in your home, but one statistic says that like 70 to 80% of women workers can't afford to have babysitters or child care employees in their home regularly. Do the children stay with neighbors? Do they stay with the mothers at work? That's a possibility. With some companies are allowing company daycare centers, and is feasible to have more in more companies. And then there's their community or religious or business-run daycare centers, and these perhaps are the most ideal under the circumstances, but of course they cost a lot of money, and that's the main barrier in having more. And related to that is wherever the child ends up, the working mother might be experiencing some stress, just wondering if the child is in optimal conditions, not in good hands. And there are other stresses too. In one article in there showed how a 8-year study by the National Heart and Lung Institute, one study showed that white-collar women, and I think particular clerical workers, had a greater risk for heart disease or other stress-related diseases. And their point was that it's the stress of being both at work and then having to work at home or worry about what's happening at home created a greater stress and perhaps led to a greater incidence of anxiety leading diseases. Let's see. One other question related to child care is that of maternity leave. And I think it varies, but that's one thing that I just saw briefly. France essentially has free education starting at 2. They have government-sponsored daycare center, but then it goes back to the tax supporters. The taxpayers support this. And will people support the idea of take the example of the bank executive's wife earning that extra $20,000 while perhaps their child is in a daycare center, and then the other side can say, well, they'll be generating more taxable income, but a lot of questions.
Daycare is a hot issue because you hear it in the institution. There's no, we're employees at the university, there's no daycare provided by the university or even halfway supported. 2 years ago, we were talking about it.
Can you speak loud?
2 years ago, they circulated a form among the hospital employees to find out what kind of interest there was in investigating daycare. Investigating diversity on daycare centers. And there's something like 92% interested. Sort of thing. Last year they circulated a petition. They'll probably circulate a petition for interest on changing it, and maybe they'll do it. Meanwhile, they're having more and more trouble getting services.
So today, because there's been a lot of success with businesses that have done that program and have their children at the
The university gives credit to the workers.
There's a lot of territory covered here. Some of you want to comment on some of the, numerous aspects of the, especially sticking is, see, a lot of this, as you pointed out, overlaps with blue-collar workers, daycare, a whole bunch of issues overlap, but, yeah.
I wonder how much discrimination that might not exist in the industry or might not exist out in the profession. Still exists in, say, the educational system that teaches people mechanics, people who are engineers, computer scientists, whatever. I've been told by some people that actually with this element is very discriminatory and female penalty. And some of those people actually discriminate against girls who are female dentists. I think that's what I have. Anyway, I wonder how much of your figures is reflected in that, how hard it is for a woman to get in down to substance care, how hard it is for a woman to do that, graduate work in engineering. Somebody looking at the figures here, between state doctors.
About 7 years ago, I don't know how much changed.
Anybody know, like we have figures on physicians compared to the numbers of women in the class is considerably up today, but for the future. But do we know about dentists? Anybody have any observations about dental school enrollment? Or anything?
No, well, I know so in the past when those women applied to dental school, they were in needed a minority representation in the class. There were more women coming out.
Yeah.
I don't think there's discrimination against the three more people getting into school. I think there is a subtle discrimination in women. I think men get upset when women sign going home now to cook dinner or whatever. And that you're expected to, at the hospital to 11 o'clock just to say the same there, not necessarily doing anything. I think that occurs in medical school. Not in dental. I don't know anything about that school. There are very few attending physicians who look so favorably.
What about these, we're going to have a whole healthcare industry thing, this whole portion of these people that are in this broad category that you said was hard to define, they're going to come up again when two people present, say, a very large industry with similar kinds of maybe some manual workers, dietary, housekeeping, and a lot of like that. If you take whole areas like right in there, and the 9 to 5 thing we're talking about, now that's a pattern of sex, but if you're dealing with the large offices, and that's the reason women come into it. You're only talking about offices. It's limited to that. It's largely the workforce, that point, 1975, look at computer operator, 45%, heat punch operator, 93%. You're right, is that going to continue? You know, what all do you see happening? Programmers, I guess, are not down there yet. But, these are, you know, you posed a number of these things, I think, and a whole bunch of other things.
Well, one other thing we pose is that with the improved technology of the office, some of the readings said that, especially now with layoffs, and then later if the economy improves, they'll be rehiring. Will they rehire people who've had experience with the traditional office equipment, or now with, you know, especially with computers and word processors, will they, you know, rule more favorably over, you know, the newer skills, the younger, perhaps, you know, the younger applicants have really in favor of that over the experienced office worker. That's another problem.
I'm surprised to see you computer operators still hiring. You don't have care with me, but ours went in, which made it seem like there was no interest in computers. And all, it's 44% for computer operators in there. Which is surprising.
Yeah, and it's tremendous numbers like in Durham Technology of women in the programming classes. I mean, you know, there's a lot of signs of the 2-year students, huge numbers of women moving in the field, but I don't know what's out in the workforce.
Did you get an idea of what they did about computer operators? That was necessary on type of operation?
I think they realize.
That year they could have meant programs, right? The census definitely. How about some of the other issues raised? Just anyone want to run around the room or on any other basis? This was a pretty comprehensive kind of coverage rather than a pointed one. You got the whole field of comments.
I can't remember specific articles I read in the past, but I remember a number of times reading about the issue involving the strife being caused in the home between a husband and wife with the married woman going out. The husband not having to have his wife work, and that causing strife, whatever kind of things like that. Do you read much about that still going on, or is that an issue?
Well, I read sort of the general thing that readings that did include that. I didn't read specific articles, but the impression I got was I read some stuff that was like new 70s and more recent, that it still was a big problem. Yeah. And that, you know, it might be, you know, more husbands that are avoiding, you know, that maybe the economic situation they're in, maybe not liking it, and maybe thinking that the need for it. But again, there's still that.
I can imagine that even though they accept the need for it, it ends up putting more strife on a family trying to stay together. And you've got people who accept something like that, say we have to do it, but they don't like it, and they end up getting arguments with you.
Yeah, I think another factor of that is when maybe the wife runs more than husband. Well, she has to be able to take the job. That's something our ministry talks about when we get married. We have to go to both things and do it. But she might be working more than you. Yeah,
That's very real. I mean, we're dealing with white collar, and some of the white collar management, you know, bank vice presidents, just kind of earning more than women. Those of you that are women in becoming physicians, if you choose not to marry physicians, marry millionaires, you know. The first woman physician I remember around here many years ago in Orange County, you know, was married to a pastor. They lived a simple life right before the medicine was brought in, you know, you think about it. But that's a problem, you know, for, I guess, women executives and professionals, you know, whether that raises sharp issues.
Not just earning more too, you know.
Yeah.
see their bills. Maybe it's been on some TV show or something too. I think it dealt with physicians. They had a man who was a doctor and his wife was a lawyer. He was finishing up a hard day and expected to be able to write about it. He'd be excited about her things because it was a hard day. And you want to put up with each other's
I
problems.
didn't know you had that much time to watch General Hospital.
I'm about to say that. Then I heard other people from my school seeing it. General Hospital. Some old Marcus Welby episode back 10 years ago. Yeah, that's right.
What about some of the other things that were not heavily covered here, like houses, that we don't have the other speaker on? You might even care to address in any offhand way, or any of you that, did the readings. Some of the readings I give you are very different. Some are rather scientific, there's stress studies from, I think, from the International Institute, but it's a lot of heavyweight spin on it. Some of the others are more provocative, I think. This one was, feeling around, you remember, in the readings I gave you for everything from the fact that office workers work indoors in buildings, remember, that are well sealed. And, your judgment's about all that amount of pollutants, in other words, locked in is a lot worse than people who work outside, with air conditioning, with, no outside air coming in. There were a lot of series of things in that article that were both practical and pretty. Some of you may want to comment on that or any other aspect of hazards that you think some of these people face that, without getting into healthcare as an industry and other stuff.
What do they classify sexual harassment? Do you think?
Well, I think that the key point there was without invitation, but without it was it could be unwanted, or there's a question of whether people make this joking remark, and the object of the joke could be very amicable about it and not take it as offensive. And I think the same situation, that joke could be very offensive to someone else, and they might consider that as sexual harassment.
The broad studies I've seen, and one of the numbers that's big on that, is that they do, like on race discrimination, or they get it out in the open, ask the people who have a potential victim, describe, and if it falls into any of those categories, then the numbers are very large. And you all are in the industry, look into whether people care to deal with it or not. And the whole healthcare industry is, as far as I'm concerned, is rough and ready, with this as any other. You think it's going on so much. Steel mills, and I think offices rank right behind them. Physicians are on the make, the nurses, all this kind of thing running all around hospitals. Place loaded with females. That's been at least my observation, and there's a lot of this going on. And the fact that there are a bunch of young females that may be halfway inviting any kind of attention is beside the point. If you're talking about people who haven't invited attention, very often they're people that you just know haven't invited attention, and other people feel they're bothered too. So that, I think it's a good point that was brought to was advocated for that. And that whole area is not big offices, always of 200-300 people, which showed the factory like atmosphere. What about the insurance agents in every town we've been in, right? 2-3 girls there. Let's hope he's a nice guy every time. But if 2 of them get up to take a coffee break in the building next door, he makes his first pass and, one slip. It happens in a very, small atmosphere as well as a big atmosphere. It doesn't have to be warming, something. It can be very informal. But I would suppose, I don't know unless you all want to comment on it, I'd like you to comment on that clause. An office is a home-like atmosphere. There's, the chairs often that are finished, I've always wondered what the big outcry in the mines was. Usually the wives of miners would be interviewed. I'm not letting my husband go down in the mine. You know, if they've been down there much, it's the least inviting atmosphere. She's got woolies on, covered with boots, covered with this, and it's dark. That's about the only thing you can say about it. It might, it's isolated and it's dark, but, and this is true of a lot of other places like that. It's a place where people can meet, like any place. But an office is quite a different, atmosphere. I just think we're talking about millions of, people. So I think it's great. What do you all think? Nice split class here, that's and close to 50-50.
I think it's a lot more comfortable. A lot of fun.
Yeah. 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 Yeah, it's always that.
Most women who get raped doesn't talk about it because essentially the judge tells them that they will find the rape.
But he was demoted, and they said, it's because, he wasn't working satisfactorily at that, level, but the female supervisor had just written a few months earlier in his, record that, that she recommended him for promotion, that he was doing fine. I think that they should.
This is good for the but did you find it sort of interesting, like women right when they get into the workforce and decreasing them starting their children, like when they decrease on the interest for like 30 years instead of maybe increasing at 22, 23, and then if they did have children, they would decrease the numbers they have with a whole, and if you find a whole whole family or something that increases their children.
No, I didn't. That trend is there.
I didn't realize that they set increasing kind of job and other students increasing what you're able for as well.
To the
What about what are your views on we all know the computer thing is coming in, and other industries, but maybe less so, say, next week in agriculture or something else. What about this area? Very heavily within that hazard much, but what about the implications? The question about, I guess, read about I gave you a reading on just when it comes to indicating the next thing, I guess there's someplace there where two things figure out, right? That must be the field. There's some kind
Well, I
of,
didn't put any
under
on
that,
that.
that's something you can trade sales price, and, that's just Katie's story that I thought was colorful because it was so, fast was thrown out because that isn't how you train on it. They won't even let her try it like that. At least if you watch the NBC stores, they only want to train it one way. I don't know why. I guess certainly if they get way on it, they won't all be happening. I didn't know whether you had other reactions because another kind of discrimination is raised that the left-handed people are probably very conscious.
Because it would be quite a somebody who says they wanted to take time out to raise them and you could use that if you want to fill out back to your work school, you have to be able to fill out that stuff on a good job. And have to go get training somewhere. You can take time or chance to get that training. And then you can feel like a good job. You can do work. I didn't think that would be a long time. How long?
any debate there? I mean, the loss of jobs, here, you know, the Phoenix, any question if the lesser number of people working on food standing when they're bringing in the leaders, I mean, there's a bunch of guys and women that are putting up and labor. Now, there's a consumer issue too, you know. I'd like to know how many of you as consumers having remembered that you got something March 79 starting to be $1.90. You know, all that normally, you get these boots down and you got to start to remember all the things you have to look right. Even though you've seen it come up on that. People in the industry saying, that's the carry it in here now. If the computer has a capture, you got it. Well, I know there's a lot of people look at that, but I found myself, is it really useful if you have more than 3 or 4 hours? Like somebody else keep up with that. What they do is pointing out that people are asking about this, they may not be fasting. That's why that's such a brutal story about that woman I saw. So let's have room. It's rather that they reduce the work. It is, yeah. It's all about a gimmick. It's giving them a whistle point. You know, when they have to do whatever they do. Well, yeah. Well, I watched that incident. I didn't quite understand, but I think I did understand the thing about it. Somebody knew it, and I had my band. So they argued, and I had a tendency to running. I'm going, they sent him back, and he said, "You're not." Then the woman said, "I said, but left the computer all day long, but they're charging everybody else the old price." This woman was a miracle. She remembered. And they agreed to it. So that's not, there is an interesting thing where it's conflict. I thought, I didn't know what there is not famous for all of that. Very inflated guy. We didn't do it nervous, but all of it. Wasn't calling it a lot. Wall Street journalists are too late for all of it. Watch it. Part of what you're reading, all the land.
Mhm.